Welcome to another exciting episode of Humanity 8.0, a podcast where we talk about our post-truth present and our transhuman future, with the aim of sketching out the outlines of what awaits us in the years and the decades ahead of us. This podcast is brought to you by Rokos. Companies with limited IT budgets and personnel can now get the same cybersecurity protection as big enterprises. Rokos' Secure Access Service Edge, SASE solution, with zero trust, provides enterprise-grade comprehensive cybersecurity so that you can focus on your business. For more, please visit www.rokos.com. That's ROQOS.com. And now, here's your host, Dr. Ahmed Bouzid, founder and CEO of Witlingo.
Professor Ingemar Patrick Linden, welcome to Humanity 8.0.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Wonderful. We are today recording on a Sunday, which is not typical of me recording, but I feel good about it because it feels light. Sundays feel light, and so I'm relaxed, and I was able to prepare as opposed to Friday usually is okay. But first, let me ask you this. Right now, you told me when we were chatting that you are at a conference.
Yeah.
I want to know a little bit more about that conference, but tell me, like, in terms of over the last few months, how many of these talks or conferences have you attended?
This is actually the first conference I've attended. Yeah.
Okay. How about virtual? Do you do virtual meetings? And
yeah, I have done that. This is the first conference in a while. Yeah.
This is
It's an unusual, big and long one. In Montenegro.
In Montenegro, yep.
Yeah.
Because I just want to sort of get the folks to understand, and they'll have all the details in the show notes and about you and all that. And I don't want to come on that, but you are a man on a mission. It feels like to me, spreading the word in any way possible. And one of those ways, and we'll get back to this, is the book here, right? It was published 2020, I think. What year was it published? But I might
2022, actually,
2022,
last year.
Yeah, I knew so it was very recent.
Almost for philosophy, that's brand new still.
Very brave, brand new in any field.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, congratulations on the book. I read it.
Thank you.
And I'm going to write a book review on it for social epistemology. But let's talk about the conference you're attending a little bit. Just tell us a little bit about what is it and why. What do you want to get out of it?
Well, this is a conference that is unique in that it's lasting for about 2 months, and it brings together people from different areas.
Wow.
Cryptocurrency and the biotech and longevity. So people who wants to kind of advance things fast. And there are also people here who wants to create jurisdictions that are more friendly and for research, where research can be conducted. I don't know if you're familiar with these ideas, where
I am familiar, but
research can be conducted in a way that's smoother, faster.
Yeah. So 2 months. It sounds like the goal here is to be comprehensive or bring all the parts together as opposed to an island of interest. And then also it seems like going a bit deeper than just shaking hands and chatting a little bit and cocktail party, right? That's
exactly.
I've never heard of 2 month conferences. What's the name of this conference? Because I want to go and attend it.
It's called Susalu, and it's actually a kind of new thing where it's really not a conference as much as a short-lived city. So about 200 people.
I love it
here, and so it's labeled a pop-up city. And so for people who are, which is the case now, especially after Corona, people are more able to work wherever they are. So what I'm working on right now is a translation of my book into Swedish, which is my native language. But I wrote a book in English. So that's obviously something I can do wherever I am. So I was invited to talk about longevity and the philosophy of longevity.
That's wonderful.
And then I also, of course, learn a lot while I'm here.
Course,
I can't be here all the time, but some people stay here for the whole period. So.
Really? And what is the name of the conference?
It's called Susalu. And
how can you spell that?
Yeah.
That's okay. That's okay. We will share it when we share the show notes. But that's amazing. Well, there you go. I'm impressed by the concept. I'm fascinated by it. I think that's exactly what we need. We need people from many disciplines coming and talking for seriously, as opposed to scratching the surface. But we're here to talk about your fascinating and daring proposition that death is a disease, and your book is about arguing or presenting arguments against or answering the arguments against the notion that we should extend life. And I think you do a great job. You give a lot of space to the arguments against, which is something I respect, as opposed to trying to bamboozle, with polemics, the folks that you want to win over. And I think the way to win over people is to give them all the arguments honestly, strengthen them. I think that's what I like about your book, is that you try to make it as strong as possible, right? And then you tackle it. So the concept of aging as a disease was a new concept to me. It never occurred to me to think of it as a disease, because we've always thought about it. It's a natural, right, progression of the human being, and it's part of the cycle of life and so forth, right?
Yeah.
So initially, when I bumped into it, first of all, I found it interesting, but then I naturally recoiled. Like, this is my gut says this is radical, and that's why I said, let me read some more.
Let
me understand, because the guy is giving a lot of space to people, so he's not trying to fool me. He clearly has an argument. So in my work, I'm a human technologist. Human language technology, right, which enables people to do things by just talking easily and so forth. One important segment of the folks who benefit from that are seniors, obviously, right? So they don't have to get up and click on things and to get music. They just, for example, they just talk. They say, play this or that, and it does it for them, right? So I get to interact quite a bit with them. So before your book, I viewed them with, well, they're just aging, and this is a phase they're going through. But now when I see them with this filter that this is a disease, it is interesting how my thinking has changed. So, for example, I have feelings more of empathy towards them. I see them as a version of myself, except that they have these infirmities, right? Whether it's cognitive or physical and so forth. So, I can say that one of the effects was a positive one, where I identify with them more, as opposed to these are folks who are a different category than me. Maybe one day I'll become one of them, but now there's a delta. Whereas with this concept, I was able to be more empathetic. So I agree.
Wait, that was very interesting. Thank you. I hadn't thought about that. I mean, I'm not in that field, so.
Well, that's the whole beauty of putting forward fruitful ideas. People can take them and do something with themselves, right? So there was a feeling of empathy, and there are other things that are positive that came out of that conception. Now, what I want you to help me with, because this remains something that I struggle with, is the following. By seeing them as folks who are ill, who are suffering from several illnesses sometimes, am I not seeing them, even though I'm empathetic with them, am I not seeing them as folks with a disability, right? And people with disabilities in our society, at least Western society, are stigmatized they can't do this, they can't do that, they might be discriminated against in jobs and so forth. So seeing them in that way, I'm wondering what you think about that, seeing folks as ill. What are the negative consequences of that? That would be the equivalent of the positive one, right? That I just shared with you.
Well, I would say that I think we all agree that we should not stigmatize people who are disabled in some way. I mean, I think that's clearly normative, that any grown-up moral person would subscribe to. So that's one. And secondly, who's afflicted by aging?
Everyone.
All of us. So I don't think it will be that group that we will be ostracizing or in some way, treating it really bad and so on, because that group, we all included in that group. I mean, we all start aging when we are born. I mean, slowly. It only starts really moving after we're 50, you could say, right?
Yeah.
But we're all on this path, right? So I don't think that necessarily would be a problem to view it as a disability. Absolutely not.
Yeah, I think the good news is we have started on the path of being inclusive, sensitive to folks who have disabilities. So I think that is very encouraging in terms of making the case that viewing folks who are aging as suffering from illness as something that probably is more useful in terms of how we engage with them and how we see ourselves when we age and so forth, than not useful, than harmful. Okay, so next I would like to go over. Here's what I would like to structure the conversation. So we talked about the concept itself, and the concept is fascinating. Next, I would like to touch on three. And you deal with lots and lots more than three.
Yeah.
But three objections to the notion that we should extend life as long as we can. And they are, first, I'm giving the most popular ones: the overpopulation, right? The second one is the boredom one, and the third one is, well, death is good because death is natural, equating good with natural. Let's spend a little bit of time on each one of them, and I just want you to tell the folks what those three objections are and how you handle them.
Yeah, so those are three good objections to hone in on, because in the surveys they've done of people's attitudes, those are very often reasons that people have for not wanting to have radical life extension for themselves, and also for not wanting to support it as a project for medicine and research. So these are very important. Overpopulation argument is the argument that if people don't die and new people keep being born, in the end the room will be full. And if the resources are limited and the number of people keeps growing, in the end there will be a disparity between the resources and the people. There will be too many people relative to resources. So it's always a relative concept. So one way of and it's a very old worry. I mean, it's a worry that's been with us since I think my. Wait.
You're fine.
Is the sound
You're good.
The same?
Yeah, you're good.
Okay.
I'll tell you if we're not getting it right, but you're good.
Okay. So it's a worry that's been with us for a long time. So, for example, in the ancients complained that the old must go away so that there will be sustenance for the young. And this was a time when we're only a few 100 million on this planet. Now, of course, we are 8 billion. We reached 1 billion around 1800 and 2 billion around 1900. And the person who's most associated with this worry is, of course, Malthus, who saw this as a kind of trap that if we have more wealth and we produce more food, then we will have more children who will then eat the surplus, and then we're back to square one. Right? So that was actually used, of course, by some Victorians to argue that it's actually a good thing that poor people die. It's necessary, right? Of course, this worry also got kind of new energy 1968 with Paul Ehrlich's very famous book, The Population Bomb, where he argued that hundreds of millions of people would starve to death over the coming decades, right? So now we sit here in 2022, and there are a lot of worries, but overall, people have more calories than they've ever had. And the biggest problem is obesity in many places rather than starvation. So, of course, there are still people who are starving, but people are starving because of bad politics, bad governance, because of bad choices, not because of number. The sheer number is not the issue here at all, right? Then also we need to look at the population development, that if you look at the UN, their prediction is that we will stabilize around 10 and 11 billion, and that will be it. Perhaps we will even become fewer on this planet. So more than half of population of this planet already live in places that are shrinking or barely stable, right? Now, to perhaps make this very, very clear, if overpopulation would be caused by living longer, then we should see the longest living countries having the greatest population growth. Instead, we see exactly the opposite, right? So Japan, where people live to 85, has one of the most drastic population shrinkages, right? So Japan, where people live the longest, is shrinking the fastest, right? They stand to perhaps lose half of the population this century, right? So there isn't, this worry is not rational, because there's one more fact here, and that is we become more efficient in producing things. Resources aren't a fixed quantity. We can create new resources, things that were not resources that we could use before. Now we will be able to through technology. So I was at the bioconference, of course, today, where they showed me how they were going to, in the future, grow concrete. So like corals. So biologically constructed concrete.
Wow.
And build houses. And they have already done that, roads and houses. And they already started to produce things in Denmark when it comes to this. This would be enormous because concrete sector is one of the most CO2 emission intensive businesses in the world. So that would be amazing. But that's just one example. On so many fronts, people are working, making things more efficient, right? So we need less and less land to grow the same amount of food. And let's say we add 10 or 20% more to the population. I think even the most pessimistic person would say that over the next 100 or 200 years, we would become 10 to 20% more efficient in producing food. That almost sounds like a joke, right? Because if we just made best practices of land use now, and if we were just more economical, and if we made better decisions about what to eat and what to grow, already now we could get those 10 and 20% very easily, right? So
let's move on.
I think that's one way of responding to the population war, and it's really strange. But I mean, I think more and more people get it, right? Because they live in countries that are shrinking, but still, it's such a go-to objection.
No, but the way you handle it is, I think, just like when I came in, I come in with my prejudices and all that. And as soon as I got exposed to your argument, I definitely changed my perception So I think what you're doing in terms of spreading the word is exactly right. And the arguments are solid. You just need to expose, people are willing. Most people are willing to open. Even if they're not willing, it goes to their head a little bit and they start thinking about it. So I want to go very quickly on the next two, because each one of them, one can go for hours. The next one is the boredom argument or objection. And the next one is death is good because or equating natural with good, right? But before that, I just want to make one thing about number two, about the population objection, which is the following. I think forever we've seen ourselves as creatures who are here to reproduce, right? And I think a lot of people now see themselves not as creatures who are here to reproduce, but to do something else. So I think in addition to resource, a rational way of dealing with the world, which is not where we are today, there's no reason whatsoever why people should be dying of hunger while others are obese. I mean, there are rational ways to solve that, and there's a lot of irrational in this world. My point is that another thing I got out of your book is not seeing ourselves as simply as these biological creatures who are here to reproduce. We are here. Most people are here. It feels to me, at least in the Western world, to self-realize. But go ahead.
No, absolutely. I mean, you could put a label on all of that it's modernity, and the more modern countries are, the more they have a stable population growth or even a negative population growth. And so absolutely correct.
So the boredom objection. I live for 200 and 300 years. I'm going to get bored, blah, blah. Tell me, how do you take care of that argument?
No, it's also a very, very common one. I remember when we told my grandmother said, "You're going to live to 100," and she said, "Oh, I hope not." And other people I talk to, they say, 85. What would you do after 85? And this is also a very long-standing worry. So, in Old Testament, Ecclesiastes, he says, it's always the same. The wind comes and the wind goes. It blows from east and it blows to west, and it's always the same. That is, there's nothing new under the sun. So if that's your view, I mean, it's also something that the Greeks talked about. So Lucretius, the Roman Epicurean, he said that in the voice of nature, that I have nothing new to show you, right? So be happy, like a guest who's been to a party, and then when it's time, I've given you all I have. It's time for you to go, right? So what to say about that? Well, first of all, I'd rather be alive and bored than not be at all. That is, I mean, how bad is boredom really as a problem? Secondly, I find it's very difficult to see that anyone should be bored who's a curious and wake-minded person has interest and projects in this world. There is almost no limit, right, to what there is to learn and experience. Perhaps I would say there is no limit to what you can learn and experience. So for me, I would say that if you are bored, if you think you are going to be bored, I think it's a personality flaw. I think you're not recognizing just how much interest and excitement and just marvel there is in existing and just existing. And it's a prediction too. You're saying, I believe that I will be bored when I'm there, but you talk to older people, a lot of people are not bored when they're there, when they're coming up in age. And if they are bored, some of that has to do with that they are aged, that they have some decrepitude, right? So I mean, looking at what drives a human forward, I think that those things will still be there if we maintain our health, and that boredom is very often a consequence also of the way that perhaps society is structured for old people and so on, that it's nothing that you can't fix on a personal level or on a societal level, right? In any case, isn't it better to wait and see, right, than to say, oh, I want it to just be over determined for me? Like, what if you have something important to do when you're older, like my father has, right? Yeah, it's a lot of things that he needs to finish, right? Although he's 85. So yeah, I mean, there's a lot you could say here, but I think that if someone is bored, it's something that they can change, something that they should work on. I see it as a personality flaw.
Okay. Okay, so I have things to. I'm gonna give one objection to that and see how you can handle it for me. So that would be that not all human beings are the same, aside their psychological makeup and so forth, and their personality. Let's put that aside, right? But we don't all have the same means. We don't have all the same education. For example, I can sit, I can think of 25 things to do in the next half hour that all of them would make me happy. For example, listening to some classical music, listening to some jazz, going over my a book of art, right? Watching a seminar about, I don't know, Marxism, right? There's a million things I could do, right? But all of those come from the fact that I have an education, that I appreciate things without having to do, I mean, looking at a book. I mean, it's just the book I can go in a sale and buy it for $1.99, actually, $1.99. And there I'm sitting and right. But folks who either don't have, number one, let's say the education, number two, the means, right? Oh, we could travel, but I can't travel. I don't have any money. I'm barely, doesn't that sort of presuppose an economic and educational structure that would enable folks when they're aging to have all these antennas, right? All these ways of enjoying the world. And the other one, coupled with that, is when I'm anxious, let's say I'm in a state of anxiety for whatever it may be, there's zero desire of me to enjoy anything, right? There's nothing. Or people who get depressed, they enjoy nothing. That's the sort of the biggest symptom of depression, is there's nothing in the world that will bring them joy. Food, music, they're completely disconnected, right? So wouldn't you say that, in order to sort of handle this argument of boredom, we need to ensure that the infrastructure, education and so forth, is there to position us to enjoy? What do you think about that?
Absolutely. So, of course, here, as it pertains to my argument, I will always say, yes. So if we then have a choice between letting people just to get sick and die the way they do now, because there's a risk that they will be bored, or try to make them more like you, someone who has a lot of different sources of interest and happiness and so on, of course, that's what we should do, right? So I don't think that the boredom risk should be treated with death. I think it should be treated, as you say, with education and conversation and so on.
I was just reacting to.
I'm completely with you.
Yeah, no, I'm completely with you too. Obviously, I was just reacting to the statement that you made. It's a personality flaw. I think the flaw of a person comes from a whole history of neglect, and so forth and so on, and then they become that kind of a person. So the responsibility for us, I think, and I think you agree, is that if we are going to take on the boredom argument, let's make sure that it's a strategy. There is a strategy behind it.
I mean, there would be, of course, a longevity optimal personalities and longevity less optimal personalities. And it will be something that we will have to work on and find out how to live a long life. But fortunately, we'll have time to do it as well together.
Yes, absolutely. No, I also agree with you that there are people who are predisposed to, to being that kind of a person who will, in fact, as they get older, they appreciate more things because they've learned more, they know more people, and so on. And then there are people who are not as sort of, they're reclusive and so forth, and they find themselves in a position where they may get a little bit susceptible to being bored than somebody else. That infrastructure is what
Can I say another thing? I mean, it's not just, I don't think boredom is so much a function of how long we live, because a lot of young people can be really bored, right?
Absolutely.
So I want to get away from that as well, that, it's a good thing old people die because they might get bored. I mean, I think it's a quite terrible argument.
Yeah, it's very one of the weakest arguments out there. Then the next one is whatever is natural is good. That is natural, therefore death is good. Sort of very syllogistically speaking. Tell me about how you tackle that one.
Yeah, so it's an incredibly old argument, and the kind of most straightforward way of tackling it is to show that there's a lot of things that are natural that we would not regard as good at all. Like, for example, cancer is quite natural, and we still think it's a terrible thing. And if we find a very good cure for cancer, it would be artificial, and it would be a very good thing. So natural and bad sometimes, natural and good sometimes. So you can't really say that just because something is natural, it's good. So that's kind of straightforward way of refuting it.
I mean, earthquakes are natural.
Earthquakes are natural.
So are hurricanes.
Yeah, and you might say opera is unnatural, but it's also very difficult to, in a sensible way, draw the distinction between the natural and the unnatural. So because you could say that it's natural for humans to use tools, but then of course computers are natural, and right, everything is natural. So it's also very difficult to draw that distinction and say, well, we got on the one hand that which is natural and really good, and on the other hand that which is artificial and not as good, or something like that the argument requires. But it's not really like that, and even the distinction is not so straightforward.
I think it smuggles that nature is good, because we think of nature, when somebody says nature, we imagine a bucolic landscape, and we imagine fruits, and we imagine birds, and say, okay, those are good things, and so therefore it's applied in a way that is like, just like you're right now, it can be dismantled very easily by showing that actually there are horrific events that happen that are natural, but that are very, they are very, very bad, right? Nature does not really share our values.
No, absolutely not. It's quite interesting. Aristotle, who's the great naturalist philosopher, who in some sense wants us to live in accordance with our nature and so on. He didn't quite mean nature just like nature, but in the sense of it, we should live as human beings, and our nature is to be rational and reasonable. So even in his philosophy, you could say that if we live as humans in a natural way, the natural way for us would be to try to survive, right?
Yeah.
So even if you accept their framework and their premises, you could make a case for extending life, that it would be one of the most natural things for a human to want. In fact, isn't the other way to accept death the least natural in some sense, if you look at an insect? And I'm just doing that to play along with their ideas, right?
No, absolutely. I mean, it is natural. We can nobody is going to argue against the sentence. It is natural to want to live. It is natural not to want to die. I mean, who's going to say that's not natural?
Exactly.
I mean, animals, they don't want to die, right?
Exactly.
You take the fly, and then the fly itself is going to try to live. And so, absolutely. It's such an elastic kind of a concept that can be used in any way.
Absolutely.
You've been listening to Humanity 8.0 with your host, Dr. Ahmed Bouzid, founder and CEO of Witlingo. Brought to you by Rokos. Thanks for listening.